What's up, cloud lovers? Today we'll be talking about basic architecture within the cloud. And of course, this is tailored once again to our series Cloud Adoption and the essentials that come with that, right? And cloud architecture actually plays a main role within that. Basic architecture, at least in information technology terms, is about the decision that we make when we are building IT systems or applications. Cloud architecture refers to the decisions we make, or you guys make, when we're building things in the cloud. Now, it takes years of experience and practice to become a good cloud architect. So we're certainly not going to cover it all in this session, but we will be able to help you figure out what steps to take as you start. As you start your cloud journey, there are a few concepts that might be useful as you build out that business case. In this chapter, we're going to talk about some of the reasons why companies move to the cloud. We're also going to cover some common cloud migration approaches and talk about why virtualization and containerization are often part of cloud adoptions. There are several reasons why companies may move to the cloud, because the cloud does introduce some new business capabilities through cost effectiveness or accessibility. A very common reason for companies first get interested in the cloud is fault tolerance. If you are a company that values your existence, you'll have some sort of disaster recovery plan. These plans usually involve a place where you store your data, or you're able to recreate key business systems in the event that your primary data center has some sort of problem. Traditionally, this was done by contracting with some provider to keep a physical second copy of your hardware ready to go at a moment's notice. The only problem is that when everything's up and running fine, that backup physical hardware is just sitting around collecting dust and is becoming obsolete while you're still paying for it. Now, sure, it's an insurance policy, but what if there is one better way? Rather than buying all your backup equipment, why not just rent it only when you need it, right? Does that sound familiar? Well, cloud providers have massive amounts of system capacity available to you in seconds, and you only have to pay for what you use, which is almost always a huge cost savings. Then when the crisis is over, you can just shut those things down and stop paying. In many ways, it's the same concept as me staying in a hotel during my holiday as to buying a house. Now, I know that's a far reach, but if I would need that house all the time, then it would probably make sense to just buy it, right? Of course, if you're constantly in need of your backup site, then I'm afraid you have some serious problems. Another reason companies adopt to the cloud is scalability. Scale is how much or how little capacity we need to meet our business's needs. Obviously, our goal is to have our capacity as close to our needs as possible. That's a pretty tricky thing to forecast. The pay-as-you-go model of cloud providers enables us flexibility and the ability to scale up or down depending on your needs. Globalization is another common reason for cloud adoption. As a company grows and expands beyond their home borders, it makes sense to have resources and services close to the markets which they're operating in, maybe for regulatory reasons or maybe performance reasons. Cloud providers already have data centers and resources in various geographies available, and you can use those with little more than a click of a mouse button. Perhaps the most valuable business reason for cloud adoption is agility. Agility is the ability to respond to changing needs. In many companies, if I wanted to run an experiment that required IT equipment, I would likely have to endure a requisition and procurement process and secure resources from the IT group to set up and maintain that equipment. Now that, we all know, can take weeks or even months. In the cloud, I could get access to the equipment in a matter of minutes, and I could try my experiment and then shut down the equipment. So I don't even need to pay for that anymore, right? Or have to occupy that. I can get my results maybe in a day versus a month, and it might only cost me a few cents. Now, there are many other ways that the cloud enables agility that we won't go into here. And then there's cost. While we would like to think it's a very straightforward thing, the reality is that most companies are not very good at tracking true cost. With cloud providers, costs are very literal. They show up on a bill, right? Some companies are surprised to learn that their cost might be more than what they believe their on-site data center cost to be, right? But pulling together the total cost of ownership, so the TCO, is pretty difficult. Are you including power and heating, cooling and fire suppressions in your calculation? How about security measures like card readers or security cameras? Sometimes it's just in how your company chooses to account for your IT assets that can significantly change the cost landscape. These hidden costs add up. Now, at the opposite end of the spectrum, if you misuse your cloud resources, they can easily cost dramatically more than any sort of on-site data center. This is why it's important to train your staff and involve experienced cloud architects. A thorough cloud adoption strategy will include cost management components. So cost savings can be realized, but be careful about the expectations you set, especially in the early days. Okay, let's talk about some cloud strategies. When people say moving to the cloud, they usually are referring to the public cloud. These are the big providers like AWS, GCP, Azure, Alibaba in China, for example. Also, some large traditional IT companies such as SAP, IBM, and Oracle have created public cloud businesses as a way to complement their traditional business. Microsoft Azure is a good example of this. Anyways, we call these public clouds because they're indeed open to the public. Who would have thought? Anybody with an internet connection and a credit card can use their services. Then we have private clouds. Private clouds are intended to be used solely by a single organization or a company. Companies can set up private clouds in their own data centers or with an external hosting provider. When companies make use of multiple clouds, be it public or private, we call this multi-cloud. Most established companies will use a multi-cloud approach referred to as hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud means that you use both private and public cloud resources, and maybe you shuffle workloads between them. It is quite common for companies to use as much of their own computing resources as possible, and then use the public cloud resources to handle temporary exceptions. Another reason why companies use a hybrid cloud approach is because of data. In fact, most companies offer a hybrid cloud approach nowadays anyway. Some companies also adopt a multi-cloud approach that involves multiple public clouds. Then there are vendor lock-ins. Vendor lock-in is when you become so entrenched with a single vendor that you may lose flexibility or negotiation positions, right? Some companies seek to minimize vendor lock-ins by using multiple public clouds. Personally, I don't get too concerned about vendor lock-in. There are some ways to mitigate that risk. Plus, from a skill set standpoint, having to constantly pivot among multiple cloud environments tends to be more challenging than it really helps. When examining a move to the cloud, there are several common methods. The first is just simply picking up our existing systems and dropping them on a cloud provider with the same software and operating system. We call this method rehosting or lift and shift, as we're just moving things from point A to point B. While this is usually the least risky way to migrate to the cloud, it does not typically offer many benefits in the long run. However, it's a very common first step for many companies. Next, we can re-platform. Instead of recreating our database on its own cloud-hosted server, maybe our cloud provider offers a fully managed version of that same database. By using that fully managed version, we can potentially save on maintenance and fault-tolerant costs. Now, we can also decide that rather than moving our applications to the cloud, we might just purchase something that's already in the cloud. For example, we might decide to license some user accounts or a new HR system or a customer relationship management system that may already be in the cloud. For example, Salesforce, who doesn't know it, Workday as well. They are examples of those types of systems. Now, if we really want to be ambitious, we can totally re-architect our application systems. We can use all the various services that our cloud provider has to offer to create what some people call a cloud-native version. This just means that we're using methods that best take advantage of what our cloud provider has to offer. This method tends to yield the best return in the long run, but is also the most complex and risky. Maybe through the evaluation of our systems and applications, we figure out that one of our systems isn't being used at all. If this is the case, since there's a cost to keeping that system running, we can retire that system. Sometimes this is called sunsetting a system or an application. Of course, we can just choose to do nothing. Maybe through our business case process, we find that there's no good reason to mess with an existing system, so we'll just leave it alone, and that's a perfect valid outcome. Two concepts that we hear frequently around cloud computing are virtualization and containerization. Cloud providers have massive amounts of computing power available for you to use in seconds. They don't have lots of people running around plugging and unplugging cables whenever you request a new system. Cloud providers make use of virtual assistants or virtualization. This just means that they can create complete software-based computer systems on top of the physical computer hardware. When you request a system, it can be set up or provisioned, as some people call it, in a matter of seconds. And when you are done, it just disappears. The physical system resource can be reallocated to other customers. So, what does a cloud provider data center look like? From the outside, they look like a big warehouse. Unless you look really closely, you probably couldn't tell a data center from any logistics warehouse. They're usually heavily secured and have lots of extra power and cooling equipment around them. Inside, there are going to be rows and rows of racks holding physical computers. Of course, those physical computers will host several virtual systems which get rented out to customers, like us, right? You might be surprised if these data centers usually only have a very small handful of people working there. Most of the maintenance is automated and people are only needed when something needs a set of physical hands, and data centers are really loud. They have lots of cooling equipment running at full blast, trying to keep everything from overheating. Now, the evolution of virtualization is containerization. First, let me explain the problem that containers are trying to solve. Let's say that we have a brand new computer system. Then, we start loading software on it. Sometimes one software package might create some conflict with another software package, and that results in errors or problems. Now let's say that we get a new computer system and we need to move some of that software from the old system to the new system. When doing that, we can accidentally leave out part of that software. Well, that can result in problems too. And in fact, you might have experienced some of the same problems on your own home computer as you try to upgrade them, right? Just imagine that problem across hundreds or thousands of systems, and you can just see what sort of headache that could be. Containers are like virtualized systems, but more lightweight. Think of it as a nice, neat little box designed to keep things organized. Containers rely on something called container engine that manages resources and allows the container to share those resources across themselves. So, if one container isn't working too hard, another container can take advantage of that one. One of those popular container engines is called Docker. So if one of your IT people uses the term Docker container, then you know what they're talking about now. Because containers are compartmentalized, that makes them very portable. Since most major cloud providers also support containers, we can pretty seamlessly move those containers to a cloud provider and it'll run just the same as it did originally. Plus, we can use any one of those major cloud providers to host these applications. If we wanted to move the container back on site in a hybrid cloud model, we can do that too, without much trouble at all. The portability of containers is one way companies are mitigating the vendor lock-in concept that I mentioned earlier. So, think of containers like a little backup that holds everything you might need to travel anywhere you want. Lastly, I will leave you with this. We have really just scratched the surface of cloud architecture here. It is a discipline that people spend years learning. So if your organization does not have access to cloud architecture experts, I would highly recommend seeking the help of one before you start designing your cloud-based architecture. If you're not careful, you can end up with quite a mess. That mess could result in a lot of cost. Now guys, looking at those costs, right? There's tangible and intangible costs, and we've briefly mentioned that, and it's going to be the next topic of the next video. So, please don't forget to like and subscribe the video if you like the content, and if you want to learn more about costs, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.